CBS classic, Mr. Rooney Goes to Dinner.
Good evening. I'm Andy Rooney, about to eat my way across America. Waiter? Do you have a Little Mac?
Good evening.
Hi.
Care for a cocktail before the meal?
I think I'll have a martini if I may.
Straight up on the rocks.
Straight up, please. Lemon peel.
Thank you.
Dinner for one, Jane. In the mid-1970s, after Richard Nixon had resigned, Americans were told that their long national nightmare was over. It was Watergate, of course, that caused the nightmare. But Andy Rooney might argue it could also have been something we ate. For example, look no further than this CBS classic, first broadcast in April of 1976. Like all journalists, Andy Rooney was concerned with what was eating the country. But he had something else in his mind, what the country itself was eating. He sampled 75 restaurants in 12 cities. It gave him heartburn and plenty of material.
You see so many things that all of us have done badly that life can be depressing unless you look for some of the things we've done well. And there are some. Take something as basic as eating, for example. It's absolutely necessary that we eat to survive. But we could do that by stuffing food in our mouth with our hands. So we can congratulate ourselves for having turned eating into a civilized and often very pleasant little ceremony called either breakfast, lunch, or dinner. All of us enjoy this ceremony, and one of the special treats we give ourselves once in a while is eating out in a restaurant. There are 400,000 restaurants in the United States, and if you ate 3 meals a day in restaurants for 70 years, you could only eat in 76,000 of them. So, obviously, I haven't been to all 400,000 restaurants in the United States. Chances are I didn't go to the one you like best or least. I didn't even go to the one I like best.
My job may seem good to some of you, but I've got a tough boss. Several months ago, he gave me an order. Travel anywhere you want in the United States, he told me. Eat in a lot of good restaurants and report back to me. I took money, credit cards, and a lot of bad advice from friends and set out across the country.
Good evening, the bakery.
The first place I went was to the bakery in Chicago. The bakery's a good restaurant. The people who run it care. It isn't great, but it's so pleasant and satisfactory that it seems great. It specializes in beef Wellington. That's tenderloin of beef baked in pie crust. The bakery has a style of its own which gives it that in quality people like so much, as though they discovered something that not many people know about.
We are very small. I could put you on the waiting list in case there comes a cancellation.
In the center of Seattle, I walked down an old flight of stone steps to get to a very French cafeteria called the Brasserie Pittsburgh.
Everybody eating the bouillabaisse today?
I always order the bouillabaisse when a place has it. I don't like it all that much, but I like to encourage the chef. The difficulty a lot of downtown restaurants like this have is that they can't do both a big lunch business and a big dinner business. And they have to survive. The Stage Delicatessen on 7th Avenue in New York is one of the few places left that makes a sandwich with a meat thicker than the bread. The Stage has always been the best of what it is. To like the Stage, of course, you have to like what it is. It represents New York to a lot of people. Hurried, rude, crude, crowded, busy, and expensive. But good if you can take it. At the Stage, the niceties are abandoned. Speed is all. A waiter can bring everything to a table for 4 and balance it on one arm, while he clears a path for himself with the other. In a gracious place like the dining room of the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, the waiters bring dishes one at a time. It used to be the best place in town to eat was always the big hotel down by the railroad station. Well, the railroad stations and the big hotels are mostly gone now, and you don't find dining rooms like this in the Holiday Inn out on Route 95.
People argue about where the best restaurants are in the United States. Boston, San Francisco, and New Orleans have always had good places. Florida has had some for a long time. New York has 100 that would be the best in town anywhere else. But there have been some changes for the better in places that didn't used to have any good restaurants. The South is getting over Southern cooking, for instance. Places like Cincinnati, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, even South Bend, Indiana, have excellent restaurants. You can get a gourmet meal in Houston, Texas, or Phoenix, Arizona. There are a few places that puzzle me, though. For instance, I don't suppose there's a place in the whole world that grows as much good food as Iowa does. They brag about it. And yet, a gourmet tour of Iowa would be a non-stop trip. The biggest trend, of course, is a leveling out that's taken place. It's harder to find that great little undiscovered place in a small town, but more often than before, you can find a restaurant that serves at least acceptable food. The Rotary Club usually meets there. In other words, there's more dependable mediocrity than there used to be. It isn't going to be very bad, but it isn't going to be very good either. And it's going to be the same in Maine as it is in Oklahoma. What's happened to all the good and bad little independent restaurants, of course, is all the big chains and the fast food places.
The big steak chains usually serve tenderized beef. They aren't expensive, but they aren't as cheap as the hamburger factories. They're often called something like the beef and bottle or the steak and stein. The fast food places are now bringing in $11.5 billion a year. Most are owned by conglomerates. Hamburgers are the big seller, a lot more American than Mom's apple pie now, and ahead of the hot dog by far. The chicken places have come up fast in the last 10 years, and there are pizza parlors everywhere. You don't have to go to Mexico to get a taco. The big newcomer is fish and chips. The biggest and most successful fast food operation is obviously McDonald's. There are 3,232 of them and counting. They've driven thousands of individually owned diners and cafes out of business. The drive-ins have been victims in a lot of areas. A typical meal in McDonald's costs about $1.75. The hamburger is good ground meat. The French fries are excellent. The shake is an imitation milkshake made with thickeners to give the impression it's made with ice cream, which it isn't. McDonald's are probably a reflection of our national character. They're fast, they're efficient, they make money, and they're clean. If they're loud and crowded, and if the food is wastefully wrapped, packaged, boxed, and bagged, let's face it, Americans, that's us.
How would you like your steak? Medium rare.
There's nothing really distinctive about American cooking. American cooking isn't even a phrase like French cooking. That accounts for why our best restaurants serve someone else's native dishes. Italian restaurants are most popular. 36% of all Americans who eat out eat in Italian restaurants at one time or another. 35%, according to the National Restaurant Association, eat in Chinese restaurants. French restaurants are most popular with people who make more than $25,000 a year. But we have everything. In the last 10 years, there's been a population explosion of Japanese restaurants.
Good afternoon, how are you?
They serve steak, shrimp, or chicken along with bean sprouts and onions. And it's all cooked right there in front of you. The man doing the cooking is part chef, part showbiz, and part kamikaze pilot. One of the good things about these places is they never serve you a piece of anything you can't eat. No bones or fat or anything. I've never been to Japan. For all I know, they don't eat like this over there. Someone told me there was a Benihana of New York in Tokyo. Part of the fun of eating out is doing something different. And this is different. I mean, how many times in the last few weeks have you come home from work to find your husband fixing a meal like this for you?
Everything okay?
Everything's smart.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Scandinavian smorgasbord places are popular. Americans like the idea of helping themselves to all they want. It's as if they were getting something free. I ate in one called the Copenhagen one day with a friend. He's a smorgasbord expert.
This is a Danish something.
Lingonberries.
That's right. That's what it is. That's the word I was
You were
hoping
grasping
for. Yeah.
for, yeah.
And they're marvelous.
What is this pink stuff, do you know?
That pink stuff is some very interesting pink stuff there. I think it's beads, I believe. I don't know. I'm not sure what that is. I've never taken it. It looks repulsive, to tell you the truth.
Good.
How about shrimp? Beautiful
Yeah,
shrimp.
I'll have a shrimp, yeah. I noticed they leave the shells on them, though. I figure that's to make it hard so you don't take too many.
That's right. This is where I go next, actually.
Well, am I not righter than you are now?
Yes, you're righter than I am.
In other words, it's really, you really take a minimum of, you go back a minimum of 3 times.
I think so, yeah. I think the average guy would probably. Or maybe I'm a little more greedy than average. I think it was good.
I usually pile my plate higher than this, but it's the same.
But any restaurant you go to where the dessert tray is brought in like this, every table, the reaction is the same. People recoil. They're obviously making the statement to their friends, I shouldn't. Oh, no, I shouldn't. You know, no, take that away. I don't want to even look at that.
But maybe I'll just have a little bit.
But then they come back to it.
And these are special.
Thank you. What are those called?
They're mascarina. They're made of almond paste.
I really shouldn't.
Very special.
No, I shouldn't either.
Well, maybe.
So have one.
Oh, thank you.
You know what I don't know what you found on this excursion of yours yet, but something that worries me about American food is the inability to get fresh indigenous food anywhere. You go to the seaside and you get frozen fish that's been caught somewhere else and frozen and sent in there. That you can't get fish right out of the sea a lot of places. In fact, it's difficult to get it someplace, particularly the Pacific West Coast, I found.
And orange juice impossible to get in
Orange
Florida.
juice, fresh vegetables. I thought somebody ought to start a string of indigenous restaurants, you know, where you just have maybe black-eyed peas and black-eyed pea country, but it'd be the greatest black-eyed peas in the world.
We did go to a restaurant in Seattle where they have great salmon that serve nothing but salmon.
Ivar's Salmon House in Seattle is one of the few places in the country that takes any really Native American food except steak and cooks it in any Native American way. They get the best salmon from the waters around the Pacific Northwest, and they cook it over smoking alder wood. Every once in a while, the cook brushes it with butter. Ivar's isn't an elegant restaurant, but its salmon is just great. It's funny that we've just begun to appreciate how good fish is now that it's getting so expensive we can't afford it.
Like everything else, there are trends in the restaurant business, fashions in what a restaurant looks like. Years ago, many good restaurants had those white tile floors with lots of mirrors around and waiters who worked there for 100 years wearing long aprons that came to their ankles. In the past 20 years, restaurants have gotten very conscious of what they look like. They're fashion conscious, too conscious probably. In the 60s, most new restaurants with any pretensions at all looked like this one.
As you came in, there was usually a coat of arms in the lobby. The dominant color was red, the lights were low, and there was often a candle on the table, held in one of those small bowls covered with white netting. The menu was predictable: steak, shrimp, chicken, fillet of sole, and South African lobster tail, meaning they didn't really have a chef. They were pleasant enough, and there's still a lot of them around, but there's a new trend. In the trade, it's called the theme restaurant. Eating in one, according to the ads, is an adventure. If you want to start a theme restaurant, you can go to JBI Industries in Compton, California. They can make the inside of your place look like anything from a submarine to a men's locker room. Carolyn Steinbach is production manager.
How many of these do you do a year? How many restaurants do you design, roughly, would you guess?
Well, we did something like 350 last year.
Could you show some to us?
Certainly.
Pirate ship?
A pirate ship.
Hey, what would it cost somebody to come up with a pirate ship in a restaurant like that?
Our pirate ship runs somewhere around $6,000.
All right. In the world is that?
This is our tin goose, seating on both wings, seating behind the engine, and then down the center of the bill.
The kids get a kick out of...
Right. They really relate well to something like this.
Out back, it looked like Santa Claus's workshop. We talked to President J. Buckbinder.
Well, now, wouldn't something like that, you make kids stay longer in a restaurant so the restaurant would have a smaller turnover? I mean, is that a factor?
It might even speed up the process of eating, because if you go in with little children, the children will want to play on the train, so they might eat faster, and the parents will want to leave more quickly. We've even tried to get design involved in the restroom areas, where people might say, well, gee, they have nice, clean restrooms. We'll stop there because the restrooms are nice, and we'll also buy our food. So everything goes as a total package situation.
You don't make any little engines for the restroom, right?
There can be little decors in the restroom areas, little train plaques or little car plaques. So when you go into a fast food operation, it's like going into a finer restaurant now. They're giving you every courtesy that you might have in a better restaurant.
Workmen were finishing up a new plastic replica of an old airplane to ship to a McDonald's opening in Glen Ellen, Illinois. We were curious about how a hamburger would taste eaten in a plastic airplane. So a few weeks later, after it had been installed, we went to Glen Ellen.
Same price whether I eat it here or I guess I'll eat it in the airplane.
It seems as though everywhere you go, they're trying to take your mind off the food. It's almost as though they were embarrassed to look like a restaurant. The most successful theme chain is Victoria Station. Just 5 years ago, 3 young Cornell Hotel School graduates started buying up old boxcars for a few $1,000s each. Now they own 250 of them, and they're using them in 46 restaurants around the country. In 5 years, sales went from nothing to $47 million.
The difference between this and the All-American Diner, of course, is that Victoria Station serves mostly roast beef and steak. And, of course, for cooking steak and roast beef, you don't need a French chef. You need a smart American kid who can cook meat.
The food is pretty good at Victoria Stations, but just as in most other gimmick restaurants, food takes second place. Along the coast of California, south of Los Angeles, a former cameraman named Bert Hickson has spent a fortune carefully building 2 places to look like old Calcutta warehouses. The warehouse in Marina del Rey is called the most successful restaurant in the world. The average check is about $9.50 a person at the warehouse, and they can serve something like 1,600 meals a day. The servers are young and friendly, the atmosphere is interesting, the food, all right.
Well, what attracts people to a place like this? Is it the atmosphere or the food?
I don't think a place of this type anymore is drawing people by the food.
As a person who likes to eat, I am just vaguely worried about the food business being taken over by entrepreneurs rather than by restaurateurs.
Well, unfortunately, Andy, what has happened in our industry in the last 10 years, or maybe even 5 years, is that the gourmet restaurants are not the ones that are making the money.
When games were still games.
It isn't the gourmet restaurants that are making the money. One of the good things about the business is that there are still a lot of impractical optimists who keep opening what they hope will be the perfect restaurant.
I'm seated at a table at the most expensive restaurant in the United States, the Palace in New York City. 2 of us just dined here. You don't eat at the Palace, you dine. And I have the check, brought on a silver platter. For 2 people, dinner, $179.35. A lot of expensive restaurants are sneaky with their checks, but there's nothing sneaky about the Palace. They lay it right on the line. 2 dinners, $100. 2 cocktails at $5 each, $10. A bottle of wine, $25. That was the second cheapest bottle on the menu, by the way. Tax, $145.80, plus 23% for service. That's $33.55 for tips, for a total of $179.35. I thought maybe you could tell me what it was I had if I went over the menu.
The first appetizer you had was the salad de homard palace, which is fresh lobster with truffles, walnut oil, artichoke bottoms, and a vinaigrette dressing.
But I thought it was pecan oil.
No, it was the walnut oil.
Uh-huh. Well, it fooled me there. And then I had the, this is the gazpacho.
Gazpacho, very thin gazpacho made with fresh vegetables and a little garniture on the side.
Made of what?
Tomato, garlic, peppers, onions, all your fresh vegetables, but just the essence of the vegetables.
Garlic seasoned with a little tomato.
Yes.
You know. And fish.
The zephyr de sole, you had fresh filet of sole filled with a mousse of salmon with a crayfish sauce, sauce nature. And then we had a little granite to cleanse the palate. Then the main course, I believe you had
the rack of lamb.
It
was
that was roasted with fresh aromatic herbs and natural eau jus. And then we started the
Now, I might as well tell you the truth.
Yes,
I wouldn't
at
want this
least
to get
5
around,
desserts.
but I had 6 desserts.
You had 6?
6. And
Well,
the
he
best
must have
was
had
that
for you.
one I got at the end. It was
a little chocolate truffle. It's ice cream mixed with pastry cream. It's dipped in a very rich chocolate with little nuts, and then we put it in the freezer.
And brought out on a ice-cold
Well, it's frozen,
compote.
so we keep it frozen until you taste it. It kind of ends the dinner.
Do you get people in here ever who were surprised at the cost?
Once in a while. Saturday night, a lady came by, and she asked the price, and I told her. And she said, I'm coming back with a boyfriend. I'm going to get a rich boyfriend to take me in. They came down, they made a reservation, they sat down. The gentleman opened the menu, and there was the price, and he jumped up. He said, well, I just ate dinner, and I thought this was just an after-theater snack. And we said, thank you, maybe another day. And the lady winked at me, and she said, well, we'll try again.
The surprising thing about the Palace is how good it is. The food is excellent. As a matter of fact, I plan to come over here real often and bring the kids.
Two of the best lunches I ever had, I ate standing up and within an hour of each other. Both places serve the same thing, oysters. Felix's is on Iberville Street, New Orleans, and the Acme Oyster House is right across from it. Every restaurant has its own way of doing things. If you don't know what it is, it's easy to look dumb the first time you go in a place.
What is the difference between the ones that are $3 a dozen and the ones that are $2.75? Oh, the table. If I eat them at the table, they're more? Are some of them harder to open than others?
Some of them hard. Some of them easy.
But they're alive until you open them, is that right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I just ate a dozen live oysters. It doesn't look like anything you'd be an amateur at. Either you know how to do it or you don't.
I've been doing it before, but like...
People who like the same things usually like each other, and it's easy to make friends eating oysters.
Looks though you wouldn't know how to eat those things.
I can inhale them.
You've been eating them a long while?
As long as I can remember. I never remember eating the first one.
Are you from New Orleans?
I was raised here.
Yeah. You live here now?
No, I live in Natchez, Mississippi now.
What do you do over there?
I retired as chief detective up there last year.
Oh, is that right?
Most of the time now I eat oysters and bum around.
Pretty good life.
Good life.
Yeah.
No complaint.
Yeah. Somebody across the street was telling me he preferred thin oysters.
Well, you don't know much about oysters, and that's all I can tell you. I like fat ones.
Well, thanks.
You're welcome. Frank Ricketts.
Andy Rooney.
Glad to know you, Andy.
Good to see you. If I go through a light in Natchez, I'll be looking for you.
Are your cluttered cabinets bursting at the seams? Now,
Deciding which restaurant not to go to is important. There are little things you look for. I have as many as 50 little reasons for steering clear of certain places. Just for example, I am very suspicious of a restaurant that says it's Polynesian and has flaming torches outside.
If a Chinese restaurant serves chop suey and chow mein, I assume that isn't very good or very Chinese. Cute names on restaurants suggest that the owners aren't very serious about their food. Places that advertise home cooking don't interest me. If I want home cooking, I'll eat home. And I'm put off if there's a sign in the window saying open. Restaurants with open signs usually leave them there even when they're closed. I'm not attracted to an establishment that puts more emphasis on liquor than food. I don't eat where there's music, either. Sometimes two things that are great by themselves are ruined when mixed. Like hair and butter, food and entertainment are best kept apart. There are just as many things that attract me to a restaurant I'm a sucker for a place bearing the first name of the owner. I'm attracted to a restaurant that has a menu written with chalk on a slate. And to me, a real sign of class is a restaurant that refuses to accept credit cards.
Would like to welcome you to the Space Needle this afternoon.
A rule I broke several times is one I have against eating in a restaurant on top of the tallest building in town. The restaurant in the Space Needle, left over from the Seattle World's Fair, is not only high, it turns, if you like to eat turning. The kitchen in the center doesn't turn, so every time a waiter comes out of the kitchen and steps on the turntable, he has to find out where his table is.
This restaurant is called simply the 95th, probably because it's on the 95th floor of the John Hancock Center in Chicago.
The day I ate there, the food was about as good as the view.
Sorry to interrupt your lunch.
Why did it join you?
Andy Rooney.
It's glad to meet you, sir.
I understand you're the resident gourmet in Chicago.
So I'm known as the gourmet on the go.
Yeah. How is food in Chicago compared with other cities in the United States?
Well, based on my travels around the world, and the United States in particular, New York has more fine restaurants than any other city just because of its sheer size. San Francisco would probably be second in terms of the number of really fine restaurants, and Chicago and New Orleans tied for third place.
One of the things you do when you're in New Orleans is argue about the best place to eat. There are people who swear that it's Galatoire's. Others swear by Arnaud's. And then there are people who swear that Brennan's is the best restaurant in all New Orleans. I suppose it was Antoine's that started the whole argument about which was the best restaurant in New Orleans. As you can see, it's been here for a long time. One of the things you say about any restaurant you know is, it isn't as good as it used to be. The food isn't the same. People have been saying that about Antoine's for a long time now. I remember my father brought me here more than 35 years ago, and they were saying it about Antoine's then. Last night I had dinner here with cameraman Bob Clemens and film editor Bob Forty. We had an interesting dinner, but it was far from perfect. We're going to eat in there again now. I'm going to have lunch. I'm going to order exactly what we had last night. We're going to have the same waiter we had. The difference is, of course, they know we're from CBS News. The camera's set up, the lights are on.
Oh, figured it out, or you need a little help, sir?
Well, maybe you could give me some advice.
All right, fine. That's what we're here for.
I had oysters Rockefeller, and I think I'd better do that
They haven't
again.
changed, right. No sense in changing. They're baked on a half shell with a green spicy sauce, no spinach. The only place in the world that does not use spinach.
So what else do you think I ought to have? I like fish of some kind, I guess, as long as I'm in New Orleans.
Fish line, I would recommend one of two, sir. Either a pompano and papillote or pompano panchartrain. Basically, what the papillote is the fillet of a pompano fish cooked in a white wine and cream sauce with crab meat and shrimp ingredients in a parchment bag.
It's cooked in paper.
In paper, yes, sir. Right.
I'll have the papillote.
Hey, Vimache, 2 crabby ravigotte and a shrimp remoulade. Puggy, 2 rocks, 1 oyster thermidor. Mike, Vimache, 4 filets, 2 medium red, 2 medium, 1 broil pompano.
Excuse me. Careful, they're very hot, sir.
You know, it does look good.
How were the oysters, all right?
This is the papillote?
Right.
Yeah, the oysters were great.
Be careful, this is very hot on the inside.
I wouldn't have ordered the souffle potatoes if I'd known he was going to put them down between the pompano and the camera. Antoine's is proud of cooking pompano in a paper bag. Frankly, I thought it would have been better cooked in something else, like a pan, maybe. Mine tasted pretty good, but it had been cooked too long, and the fish itself had disintegrated.
What do you have for dessert?
Caramel custard, vanilla ice cream with hot fudge, cherry jubilee, strawberries jubilee, crepe Suzette.
Maybe I'll have some cheese.
Fromage, Gruyere, camembert.
I think I'll have some camembert.
Camembert, fine. Thank you.
Tommy, the waiter, said he could make $350 a week working just 1 meal a day.
What is this, guava?
Yes, sir. Guava, a little butter, camembert, and toasted crackers, sir.
Well, now, what happened last night? We came in, we sat down. We were 3 anonymous people. We waited almost 45 minutes to give our order, our meal order. Then when we gave it, it came within 5 minutes, suggesting that it was pre-prepared, too.
Well, it may seem in that particular time that it was like that, but it could have been a probability. The waiter could have been overloaded. You see, another thing...
You were the waiter.
Right.
Were you overloaded?
To some
you
extent,
were much better today than you were last night.
The simple reason is the average person doesn't know, again, through the procedure of the restaurant. You know, it's like anything else in any business. Everything's not perfect throughout 7-day week working period. It does have its hang-ups as well as it does has its smoothness.
Yeah, but that doesn't cost me any less when I come in when you're crowded.
It's understandable only due to the fact that you would have to know the procedures and the working conditions of the establishment itself.
What about this cheese? Now, this cheese wasn't right last night, and it's not right at all now. It's like...
again, too, I would have to refer, that would have to be in the kitchen department. We try to bring it out
Now, when I
perfectly
complain like that, do you go back and say, gee, this guy out here is really giving me a tough time?
No, sir, not that you're giving us a tough time. That's the only way we can correct anything that is coming out the kitchen wrongly, due to the fact is, who do you see more of, your waiter or the chef?
If I had been one of those people who ranks restaurants, last night I would have given the end point a 1, which isn't much. I guess I'll have a check then. Thanks.
It was my pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Through and collected several hundred menus. You can tell a lot about a restaurant just from a quick look at its menu, even from the outside of it. For instance, if it has a tassel on the menu, you can add a couple of dollars per person. Here's a place called the Buttonwood Tree. It's in Kansas City. It calls itself the Pride of Kansas City. There's something called the Captain's Seafood Platter. The trouble with something called the Captain's Seafood Platter in Kansas City is that all the fish comes frozen, and by the time it's cooked in hot fat, you can't tell the oysters from the French fries. Don Neal's Mr. T-Bone, he's a musician, I guess. This is a kind of a menu that's so cute you can hardly tell what they have to eat. Rhapsody of beef, roast top sirloin, a melody of flavor, symphony of the deep, baked Lake Superior whitefish, taste buds in concert, breast of chicken amandine. Here's a place called the Bally High, a Polynesian restaurant. The poo-poo platter they have, shrimp pango pango. I never know about the drinks in a place like this. There's one called the Scorpion Bowl. I hate drinking from a glass with a naked girl on it. Oh, I don't like a menu that's thinner than I am. El Camino Real. This is a place called Lord Fletcher's. This isn't thin, actually, it's fat. It goes this way. I don't mind a menu that's fatter than I am. This is Old English. This is the Lamplighter. Now, this is a family restaurant. And it's one of those where they tell you about the family. For over 50 years, the Ferry family has enjoyed serving the finest food to nice people like you. And this is another one. This is the Pursutis. Mama and Papa Pursuti on the cover there. And yeah, they tell you about the Pursutis here. In 1933, Mr. and Mrs. S. Pursuti converted their home into a restaurant. But they, fine, but what do they got to eat today? This is something called the Shalaco. Very fancy menu, some kind of hide. And they got a lot of, this is one of those that has a lot of writing in it, you know. I always figure if I wanted to read, I'd go to a library, but some of these menus. The Shalaco is the most important religious ceremony performed by the Zuni Indians, and it goes on down here, here. And there's a middle, they got a little about the food. You can imagine a waiter standing there while you read the history of the Zuni Indians. Here's a place called the Parlor, where this is. Oh, there's no doubt where this is. It is dusk in St. Paul. Sunset's fading light reflects a red ribbon on the meandering Mississippi River. The skyline is silhouetted against the blue-gray haze. It's a menu. We had a not particularly reliable survey made of menus, and we have the results for you. We've collected them. According to the count we made, the most used words on menus were these. Freshly was far and away the first. Succulent was very big on menus. On a bed of, and on a bed of lettuce and on beds of things like that. Tangy, hearty, luscious, to your liking was 9, topped with 10. Savory, number 11, was interesting. Actually, on menus where the dinner was more than $7.50, it was usually spelled with a U, S-A-V-O-U-R-Y. Tempting and delicious were tied for 12th. Surrounded by, and on a bed of are a lot the same, but on a bed of actually beat out surrounded by. Golden brown, almost everything is golden brown. Sometimes the lettuce is golden brown. By our chef, even places that don't have a chef, have by our chef. Seasoned to perfection, choice morsels of, delicately and thick were tied for 18. 19 was crisp. And number 20 on our list of most used words was not responsible for personal property. These are all wine menus. Last year was a very good year for wine menus. Anyone who ever buys wine in a restaurant, I think, always wonders how much the same bottle would cost him in a liquor store. We thought we'd find out. What's the price of the Chauvenet Red Cap?
$6.99.
Chauvenet Red Cap, $20 a bottle. This is at the restaurant called the Michelangelo. Let's see, Liebfrau Milch Blue Nun, $10. What do you get for Blue Nun?
$3.89.
A Mouton Cadet Rothschild, 1970, $12. This Mouton Cadet, what do you get for that?
$3.99.
You don't lose any money on that either?
No.
Chateau Malaget, $6.45.
That's a Côte de Rhône, $1.99.
Here's a bottle of Puy Fumé de la Doucette, 1971, $18. What do you get for that?
La Doucette Puy Fumé, we sell it for $6.99.
It's a restaurant in Las Vegas. Here, the Lancers Rosé is $11. Lancers Van Rosé.
Lancers sells for $4.29.
I always thought this was the kind of a wine where the bottle was worth more than the drink. I guess you wouldn't want to comment on that.
No, I'd rather not.
Everyone complains about wine snobs. Snobs of every kind have a bad reputation in America. No one understands that it's the snobs who set the standards of excellence in the world. There are art snobs, literary snobs, music snobs, and in every case, it's the snobs who sneer at mediocrity. The gourmets are the food snobs. Without them, we'd all be eating peanut butter sandwiches. Like the gourmets, wine snobs know what they're talking about. So, if you're going to drink wine, get to know something about it. Be prepared to pay too much for a bottle of wine. Be your own wine snob. It's part of the fun. A good rule of thumb is, if you can afford a wine, don't buy it.
We are introducing to the American market a wine dispenser. It chills the wine.
We went to the National Restaurant Association convention in Chicago, and everywhere you went, someone was pushing food or drink at you. Everyone who sells anything to restaurants had an exhibit there. So there were garbage cans, corn cookers, menu changers, wall decorations, seating arrangements, and devices to keep bartenders from stealing. Restaurants sell 20% of all the food eaten in the United States. They're first in the number of retail business places. In other words, there are more restaurants than any other kind of store. We did a lot of poking around at the convention, and we got a frightening look at what some restaurants are going to be feeding us.
So what is this stuff?
Well, this is a soy protein with about 60% protein, and it goes...
So what does it do for anyone?
It stretches out products like tuna salad by about 30%.
What do they use it in addition to tuna fish?
It goes into egg salads. It is used to extend all kinds of meats, either uncooked as such meat patties, or it might go into pre-cooked entrees, sloppy joe, chili con carne.
Is it any good?
What kind of a question is that?
Now, what is this here?
These are our Morningstar institutional link sausage-like flavored products. They're free
Sausage-like?
Sausage-like flavor. We have...
They're artificial sausage.
They're artificial sausage. They have no cholesterol, no animal fat.
What do they have?
Well, they're made out of various vegetable proteins. soy protein, wheat protein, and we use egg albumin to hold it together.
Are you a chef? What are you?
No, I'm trained as a biochemist.
What if I put my finger in there? That wouldn't be good for it, huh? No. In other words, if I ate a piece of meat with this on it, it wouldn't tenderize my stomach.
No, most definitely
No. What is this machine?
This is a mechanical bone-in meat tenderizer. As the meat passes through,
You put the meat on there.
put the meat on here, it'll pass through underneath the needles. The needles come down and penetrate the meat and break down the chicken.
So a restaurant could buy this and really buy less expensive meat.
That's right.
No, I would call that canned. You wouldn't, though. Not fresh.
Fresh frozen. Fresh frozen.
Oh, fresh frozen. Right. No, standard chicken base. How do you pronounce that?
Contains hydrolyzed vegetable protein.
Salt, chicken fat, monosodium glutamate, dehydrated chicken, dextrose, dehydrated vegetable, spices and spice extracts, tricalcium phosphate, citric acid.
Right.
And that's chicken base?
That's right.
Tastes like chicken?
Exactly. 4 ounces of it tastes like makes a gallon.
You put just 4 ounces of this hydrolyzed.
And that's the basis for it. In other words, if you see chicken, you want chicken noodle, you throw noodles in. Basically,
how many restaurants don't use anything like this? Or
almost 100% of the restaurants. If you're not, then you're way on the other side of the shelf. You can't exist today. How in the hell can you, where are they going to get it? I mean, it's not artificial, really. You've got monosodium glutamate, you've got extracts, you've got fats. The real thing mixed with the chemicals that does. It's just like this can feed, or this can substitute or feed 1,000 people where for chicken, where you might have to take 100 chickens.
Chickens must love it.
Well, they use a little chicken. You're a nice fella.
That's a good-looking jacket you got on.
Thank you very much.
Restaurants are one of the few good examples left of really free enterprise in America. There isn't much government control of them, and the good ones always prosper. The bad ones usually, though not always, go out of business. The best restaurants are operated by people who like food better than money. The worst ones are run by people who don't know anything about food or money.
So that's our report on eating out in America. The camera crew is glad it's over because they say they're tired of spending their dinner hour watching me eat. During the time we've been working on it, many friends and others here at CBS have been stopping me in the hallway to ask one question. It's a question I haven't mentioned so far in the broadcast, but the answer, as of this morning, 14 pounds. Good night.
Since we first went to dinner with Mr. Rooney, a few things have changed. At last count, there were more than 22,000 McDonald's restaurants, 7 times the number in 1976. And the number of restaurants in America overall has doubled to nearly 800,000. Some things, of course, will never change. Rooney, for example. He still has some strong opinions about food and restaurants and the things we eat. To sum it up, he told us after all these years, American cuisine is still a contradiction in terms. Well, that's his opinion. I'm Morley Safer, and those are the people who touched our lives from CBS Classics.
That's the way it is.
And that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
It's a motor crime guy, CBS News. Good night.
I'll see you on the radio.
Good night, and good luck.
You're about to see some of the